Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Thursday, April 2nd on a unscheduled Toronto Blue Jays off day. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, the rain in Chicago gives us a good chance to catch up on this Blue Jays team coming off a series loss to the Colorado Rockies, which was maybe a little unexpected, but certainly I would say, the sky is not falling at this point as we are 6 games into the season.
Yeah, I mean, those are 6 words you don't really want to be saying. Series loss to the Colorado Rockies. But, all things being said, it's so early. It's hard to read too much really into anything that particularly happened. Though we are going to dig into some stuff. But the biggest news, of course, the injury to Cody Ponce, which throws an already Blue Jays rotation in flux even more so.
Yeah, 100%. Before we get into that though, I mean, I just wanted like overarching thoughts of the series before we kind of dive in a little bit more. Obviously, losing to this Rockies team twice in 3 games is never ideal, and I think obviously you see some of the dramatic reactions based on how things unfolded over the weekend. I kind of just wonder what your thoughts are on, like trying to weigh the fact that it's so early and, this stuff just kind of happens in baseball versus the level of play that the Blue Jays brought to the field.
They didn't look great. Like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I mean, they got pretty badly diced up by a combination of plumbers and firemen. But, at the same time, in a 162 game season, you're gonna have weird stuff happen. And outside of a blow up where Cody Ponce gets hurt and the bullpen kind of gets taxed, it was a couple of close. There was a one-run game in there, I believe. The variance of a 162 game season is that sometimes the, AL champions are going to lose to a historically bad Colorado Rockies team. And that's just how stuff happens. As they say, you're going to win a third of your games, you're going to lose a third of your games. And it's the other third is whether you're going to make the postseason or not, and whether you're going to be a competitive team or not. Uh, for these Jays, obviously, it's suboptimal that they weren't able to take at least 2 of 3 from the Rockies. But at the same time, in a 3 game sample size so early in the season, you're bound to run into speed bumps here and there. Now, there are concerning things to, I guess, observe from the series. The bats continue to kind of sputter at times. There's been a lack of ability to get guys in from scoring position. They left the bases loaded at least more than once during the series. So the hope is that this is a blip and not a trend. But that being said, 3 games out of 6, if you have a tough 3 games, yeah, your season stats aren't going to look great because you've played 6 games total.
Yeah. Credit to the Rockies too. I actually thought that they played pretty well, and I was kind of impressed by, some of the little things, right? Like they were running the bases well. They're putting the ball in play. Obviously, the Blue Jays coming off the series against the A's where they strike out 50, and obviously they don't quite reach that mark here against Colorado. So I thought the best version of the Rockies that we've seen in a couple of years take on the Blue Jays. So credit to them, but yeah, I mean, one of those things, kind of baseball, and the Blue Jays will have a good chance to kind of bounce back again this weekend against the White Sox. But we can dive in more. I think obviously the number one storyline for this Blue Jays team coming out of the series is Cody Ponce, who ends up with a right ACL sprain. He's going off to see Dr. Neil L. Atrash, I believe is the pronunciation, but apologies if I got that wrong. After just a weird play where he goes and hyperextends his knee and is down on the ground and has to be carted off. Like really a scary play. But, for the Blue Jays, where we had been, sitting here talking, a month ago at this time about how they have too much pitching after bringing in Max Scherzer, and now they're down to a situation where they're staring bullpen days in the face after bringing up Lazaro Estrada to take Ponce's spot on the roster.
I mean, their pitching staff on the injured list is potentially a top 10 rotation in baseball at this point. The ask of guys like Kevin Gausman and Dylan Cease is going to be immense now because they're really running out, those two and a band of merry men. It's brutal. I mean, the obviously Scherzer showed he's still got something in the tank, but who knows how that's gonna last. Eric Lauer had an incredible outing, one of his best of his career. Who knows how that's gonna sustain itself moving forward? And then now they call up Laz Estrada. It doesn't sound like he's going to be part of the rotation though, which that creates the question you kind of alluded to is are we looking at bullpen days here? And if they are looking at bullpen days, how does that affect the rest of the situation here? And this is a Blue Jays team that came into the season with, I think we said 8 starters.
Yeah, it's incredible the way that it's fallen. I mean, you mentioned it. Like if you look at the Blue Jays injured list of starting pitchers right now, it's Trey Savage, it's Shane Bieber, it's Jose Barrios, it's Cody Ponce, it's Bowden Francis. Like that's a pretty decent group of five there. And now we're looking at a spot where the Blue Jays don't really have an option to fill in on that fifth day. And then obviously they said that they're not going to move the schedule around so that they run a 4-man rotation until they figure or until they find a longer term solution. But kind of, with that really is going to put a tax on the bullpen, which we've kind of seen, teetering on the edge of like almost overuse already to this point, even though, the starters have been fairly solid. But when you lose Ponce and kind of have to go through that scenario, it's just going to put a little bit of extra tax on your bullpen. So kind of looking at that side of things. We just had to see Tyler Heineman pitch 2 innings, right? Because they're trying to save arms. So I kind of wonder for you, like, I mean, is the bullpen day the best way to go? Is it, do you try and stretch Lázaro Estrada out? Do you go down to AAA and call up like a Chad Dallas or a CJ Van Eyck or somebody like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what options they have here, unless you really want to go crazy and see what you get out of Louis Varland, who didn't get stretched out during spring because he's supposed to be the eighth inning guy. It's brutal. And the other thing too is that there's been so many leverage situations, especially during the series against the Rockies, all close games except for obviously, the Heineman blow up. And it becomes a question of if you are going to have bullpen days, who's pitching those days?
Yeah. Well, you're going to need somebody to kind of give you that length, right? And I think, Estrada to me, they've moved him off starting in AAA, but his first outing of the year in the minors was 2 2/3, right? So he's kind of got some of that length, and I guess you could kind of put him at the start of the game and see if he's able to give you three, like one time through the order, basically. I mentioned like CJ Van Eyck and Chad Dallas and Grant Rogers, some of those guys who have been starting in AAA, like they're not, built up beyond 4 innings at this point. I don't think that you could reasonably call them up and expect them to do anything more than one time through the order. So, it's going to be a tall ask for this bullpen to kind of find their way through, and especially when they come into the year, right? And where the discussion was of that last bullpen spot where they were talking about bringing in somebody that can give you multiple innings. And of course they decide to go with Spencer Miles, who at this point is seemingly, a 1 2 inning guy max, right? Like they don't kind of have the Eric Lauer bridge option that they did last year to step in and can give you like 3 innings in any given game. So they just don't really have that guy. Like, I mean, would you consider dipping into the free agent market like a Lucas Giolito type, or would that just be, somebody that you got to ramp up, and by the time that he's ramped up, then, maybe one of these other guys is ready to go?
I don't hate that idea just because to me, they're so thin on options, right? I mean, who knows how long until Barrios is back? It sounds like Shane Bieber is just getting rolling. The guy that's most imminently close is Trey Savage, who you've already said you're going to have to limit his innings to a certain degree, right? So at a certain point, it does seem like it would make some sense to go out there and see if you can grab a Lucas Giolito, who, mind you, I mean, this is not the Lucas Giolito of old. This is a guy that, in a lot of ways, has taken quite the step back from the highs that he had a number of years ago. And, are you going to have to pay top dollar for a guy that might end up designated for assignment by June 1st, right?
we're right back in the Spencer Turnbull, Jose Urania conversation that we were having last year. But of
And it's
course,
crazy
that
too
was by
because
May though.
and even at that, I don't think anybody looked at the Blue Jays rotation last year and saw the dynamic group of five in the same way that coming into this year, you had a list of guys and you felt good about pretty much all of them to be at least threes or fours for your team, right? And at this stage, you're trotting out ideally two aces. You think they're two aces in Gosman and Cease. And Gosman, nothing to dispel that notion in his last outing against the Rockies. He again struck out 10 plus. But now who else is out there? Eric Lauer is not going to continue to rack up strikeouts the way he did against the Athletics. That much is obvious. And then Max Scherzer is, as mentioned, a bit of a ticking time bomb himself. And there's no fifth starter right now.
It's incredible that we've gotten to this point, given just how things unfolded over the course of the offseason and in the spring. So, we'll see. I think kind of the updates on all the guys like seems like they're maybe like 2 weeks still away. So we'll kind of see how they manage it. Obviously, they have the off day today. There's an off day next Thursday after the Dodgers series, and then there's an off day the Monday after they get back from the Twin series. So but then after that, then you're going 3 straight series without an off day. So I don't know, that kind of gives you like a 2 weekish window to kind of, massage your rotation and try and figure it out. And, it'll just be interesting. I mean, to kind of close this, I mean, what do you think is the best solution as we sit here on April 2nd for their next, let's say, 3 times through the rotation?
I think it's going to end up being bullpen days, but you've got to hunt down somebody. The hope, I guess, the best case scenario is you get a great start in AAA from, a Chad Dallas or whoever it is, and a Grant Rogers or whatnot. And from there, you're able to get them up to the big leagues because they show you something in AAA. But that's just an enormous ask for these guys, given how fresh and how young they are.
Yeah. To me, Chad Dallas was the most impressive starter that they've had so far. He was 5 Ks over 3 innings. But that's a guy that's coming back from Tommy John too. So you're trying to manage his workload, right? So um man, like Ricky Tiedemann, put him into this conversation as well, right? As a guy on the IL that if he was healthy and had a good spring, that he could, maybe be a guy that factors in here. But that's not the world that the Blue Jays are living in right now. So we can kind of move on from that conversation. I just want to say for Cody Ponce, like just terrible for a guy who obviously worked his butt off to get back to the major leagues, had such a good year, lands his contract with the Blue Jays, and seems like a really likable dude and somebody that very easy to root for. I'll say so. A tough break for him for sure, and hopefully that he's able to avoid surgery and maybe even be back by sometime later this year, if in the best case scenario.
Yeah, and obviously Dylan Cease was the big fish, but there may not have been a single pitcher on the Blue Jays I was as excited to see what they had as Cody Ponce, because this is a guy that had done such incredible stuff in Korea that you just were kind of salivating at, is this a different pitcher? I want to see what he can do on a big league mound over the course of a season, and you're just not going to get that in any meaningful capacity. I think back to 2015, I think it was. And Marcus Stroman during spring training had pretty much the exact same thing happen. And eventually he got back for September. But, you know, for the Jays, for Cody Ponce, and in a lot of ways there are parallels. That 2015 team, obviously, first of all, was dynamic in its own right, but also was leaning much more heavily on 2015 Marcus Stroman than the 2026 Blue Jays are leaning on Cody Ponce. But it's kind of the same idea, right? Where it's this guy that you're so excited to see if they can take the step and if they can become a significant, figure contribution wise, excuse me, and it just puts everything on pause.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, even if like Cody Ponce has become like a really important and key figure in this rotation because they just need starters who are good at this point and or able to pitch deep into games. So, and I mean, you saw what happens, right? Like he comes out of the game early and they end up losing that game 14-5. And it's Tyler, that's the game that Tyler Heineman has to come in and pitch where they put Brendan Little to work. They put Spencer Miles to work. Like they leave all those guys out there a little bit longer than maybe they should. And you see what happens when you just kind of have to, patch your pitching staff on the fly. So we'll see how it comes out. Obviously, I would imagine that we'll get some news about how the rotation will shake out in the next couple weeks, probably tomorrow. So interested to see, kind of what decision they do decide to go with that. Louis Varland has the experience opening, so I would, kind of lean that probably ends up being the way that they go. But we'll see.
Do you
Um,
think there's a universe that they could even possibly stretch him out?
Louis.
Yeah.
I mean, when they traded for him, I was like, this guy's a starter, right? So, he has the mix, like kind of the velocity and stuff. But I just like, by if you work to stretch him out by the time he's like, able to go, let's say 5 innings, then you're probably looking at a similar timeline to having some of these other guys back. So like, maybe not the worst idea if you think that he has the capability to go back to starting and be an effective starter. But I just for the short term solution, it just really doesn't seem like there is one.
They're in a real pickle.
Yeah. Let's move on. I mean, the rest of the series, obviously, we talk about that 14-5 game, just, kind of goes to the dumps after that 7-run sixth inning where, Miles gives up the homer and Brendan Little comes in and struggles again. And then, the next day, Scherzer's really was really excellent in that game. And, they get homers from Springer and or not Homer. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong game here. Where they just put together a nice day of offense and score 5 runs. It was like kind of the easy win that you'd been looking for from this Blue Jays team that they kind of hadn't had to this point in the season. And then the extra inning game to close out the series where Gosman pitches exceptionally. He's perfect. I think he was perfect through 4 or 5 and strikes out 10 as you mentioned, only giving up 2 hits. And then of course Tommy Nance loses the zone, and that's something that we haven't really seen from him. And then, of course, the Brendan Little stuff where he comes in and gives up the go-ahead run in the ninth. I wonder, like, specific takeaways for you, like on any individual players, like more, hitting side, pitching side. I mean, kind of who was on your mind as that series came to an end?
I mean, we've got it down here, and I think it's true as the uh, emergence, and emergence is a big word to use 6 games in, but Jesus Sanchez has looked the part, without a doubt in my mind. This is a guy that came into the season, first of all as kind of a bench bat almost,
Yeah,
but very clearly to me looks like he can and should be a contributor for this team. He hits the ball hard. That is his MO. And this is a guy that if you can kind of figure out how to get him to even elevate the ball a little bit, he's going to find success. And the early returns so far have been promising. Now, again, it's so early that I even struggle to answer the question because who do you really want to read into this early? Okamoto's been great. Yeah, he's carrying a 400 BABIP. Oh, Vladdy's looked okay. Yeah, but he hasn't looked that great. Addison Barger, big breakout pick, has looked just lost at the plate to start the season, right? There hasn't been a guy that to me has necessarily come screaming out of the gates. Again, Varsho, same thing. Just not looking quite like the guy he was in spring. Or Alejandro Kirk, again, just a little bit slow in terms of just what you want from him out of the gate. This is a team that's just kind of getting by with some really exceptional pitching, but the hitting has not necessarily gotten to the point where everybody is really clicking on all cylinders. So, I mean, the one standout for sure, Jesus Sanchez, but it's hard to not really have anyone that's really going
yeah.
and be winning ball games.
Yeah, I mean overall it was a tough series, right? Like they weren't driving the ball a ton, and kind of when they did, it was in that 14-5 loss when Tyler Heineman was pitching. So you weren't really concerned about Kazuma Okamoto hitting his second home run, and some of the Davis Schneider hitting home run, and kind of some of the guys actually starting to drive the ball. So yeah, like you said, tough to really compile a lot of takeaways from a 3 game sample this early into the season. They kind of did the same thing last year, right? Where they got off to the really slow start offensively, and we were kind of thinking, "Oh boy, here we go again," coming off 2024. You think like they're just maybe a slow starting group, or is it like are they going to be able to bounce? Are they going to come out in Chicago and score a ton of runs?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? The hope is that you're going to be able to get to the White Sox. Now, I don't have their probable pitchers in front of me, but I would figure that you're going to get the chance to go up against some guys that you're hopefully going to be able to batter around. But at the same time, we would have said that about the Colorado Rockies, and Kyle Freeland had his way with the Blue Jays, right? So, at that point, you've got this schedule in front of you of generally weaker opponents, but you've still got to be able to take advantage and beat the guys in front of you. And to lose a series to the Rockies here really kind of throws things a little bit into doubt in terms of whether the Bats are going to be able to bring what they brought last year into 2026.
So pitching matchups for this series against the White Sox. Tomorrow, Friday, is Dylan Cease against Grant Taylor, which will be kind of fun because Grant Taylor throws 100 miles per hour. I don't know if he's really built up as a starter at this point, but will be fun there. Game two, Eric Lauer against Anthony Kay. A little reunion there for the Blue Jays, and then the third game is Davis Martin against TBD. So. Certainly some guys that you feel like they should be able to score some runs against. And, I mean, even further than that, the White Sox bullpen is one that you probably feel pretty confident about being able to get to.
And that's the thing, right? Is you figure that you'll be able to get to these guys, right? But again, we said that about the Rockies series, and that wasn't the case. So I think we'll learn more as the season progresses. That much is obvious. But, to this point, what have I learned other than the Jays right now have some really talented arms at the top of their rotation? Other than that, I don't feel like I've had anything that I can take away and really kind of take to the bank.
I'll tell you one thing that I've learned about this 2026 Blue Jays team. It's that Mason Fluharty is way more important to their success than just about anybody in that bullpen. Like, got to be, top three as things stand right now. The way that he's been used, I know he's only thrown an inning and 2/3, but he's thrown in 4 games. But he's had some really, important moments for this team. And, the Brendan Little thing, we talked about it last time. The discourse around Brendan Little has gotten obviously very loud given the way that his season has begun, but I really don't have like a change of opinion just yet at this point. I think there's some issues there for sure, but it's 3 outings for a reliever, like really tough to take away too much for that, especially a guy like him who is so important. So I just wonder, like for you on the left-handed side of this Blue Jays bullpen, where in the high minors, they don't have, lefties that are kind of creeping up and pushing to take up a spot in the big league bullpen. Like how do you kind of assess where, Fluharty and Little stand here on April
I,
2nd?
I
It's
mean,
so
to
funny to say.
me,
Like,
it's
what do you make
crazy.
of them after 6 games? But it's yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you what I make is that the Jays better pray that Ricky Tiedemann is able to get in some good health here, because that left-handed reliever spot right now, it's a jump ball of all jump balls, and both of these guys are standing at about 4 feet 5. Uh, I mean, it's not ideal. I think that much is obvious. The Brennan Little stuff, the homer is obviously of concern, but you would hope eventually he's able to get to the point where he's regained some confidence, because this is clearly a guy that just does not have the sauce right now. But again, the game, or excuse me, the go ahead run against the Rockies, it's the ghost runner. Like,
Yeah.
it's tough, but you look at a run expectancy matrix and you're supposed to score in extra innings. The Jays were the ones, the Bats were the ones that failed to deliver. I think, if I'm looking at this Blue Jays bullpen, they have so much talent in there, but it's such a fickle position that if someone as, load bearing as a Brendan Little comes out of the gates looking like this, it becomes a bit of a question. Now, there's talk about needing to designate him for assignment or all this, dump him. Nonsensical. I mean, let's make this very clear. This is a pre-arb optionable reliever. This is not the kind of guy that gets designated for assignment unless something astounding happens, a la Alek Manoah, where he literally just loses his velo, he loses his feel for his pitches, and he just completely crumbles at the seams. And it's easy to say that right now, but if you look at the sample size, we're talking about basically a 4 or 5 game sample of him struggling. He's struggling. I don't think that much is up for debate. Uh, but the guy that was there in spring that was throwing 98, I don't know where that fastball has been. I'd love to see it at some point. And even to that, you know, I, it's frustrating, right? Because you want to believe in the guy, but he's got to be better.
So I'm glad that you brought that up because I pulled these as you were talking there. So obviously Little looked a little bit different in spring training. So I pulled up kind of his pitch mix differences between what he was doing in spring versus what he is doing in the regular season. And again, obviously spring training is the time to work on things and maybe the confidence isn't quite there. But during spring training, he was 33% sinker, 26% knuckle curve, 25% slider, which might be the cutter, and then 16% four seam fastball, which was kind of the big thing that we saw from him, right? The big change there. And so far in the regular season, he's gone 41% knuckle curve, 39% sinker, 11% fastball. And then, give and take some slider and cutter mixed in there. So it's like,
Yeah,
like you
it's like
work on
not.
it,
It's
and your spring goes fairly well. And again, spring training results are what they are. You don't want to read too much into them, but that's like a process thing that happened during the spring training that makes you go, hey, maybe Brendan Little has something new in the bag for him to come out and, kind of look just like the guy that we saw at the end of last year.
and it just wasn't the case. He's come out and he's just sputtered.
Yeah, I wonder what it is though. I wonder like if just maybe he's
Do you
not
think it's between the
confident in the
ears?
fastball.
Is that what you're thinking? It's got to be between the ears. Like I don't know, man. It's
I
very frustrating because like again, like I said, this is a pretty integral arm to this Blue Jays team. If he's like hurting, if he's just doesn't have it right now, doesn't have it for the rest of the season, you're down to one lefty, and that one lefty is Mason Fluharty, who, no disrespect, is like in an ideal bullpen, a second lefty, ideally.
Well, like that's the structure that they have built, right? Where Little is supposed to be your number one lefty, and I mean, you look at what Little did in the first half of last year, and I think that it's certainly in there. Obviously, the league adjusted to him, right? Where his first half of 2025 was so excellent. Like he was, obviously among the highest use relievers, but also among the most effective relievers. Through the first half of 2025, it was a 2.03 ERA with 65 strikeouts in 44 innings. Like
Like this was a guy that
that's the
was
guy
just
that you want,
putting guys
right?
away.
Yeah. And obviously it's just, the league is adjusted and he's obviously just battling it. And, I think that the pitcher's still in there because the stuff hasn't really changed, but he's got to be in the zone more and he's just a guy that I think you just got to kind of find that confidence. And I mean, again, we're not in the clubhouse. We don't really know what that looks like, what the confidence level is there, but I think you can read fairly well into some of his reactions on the mound.
Yeah, and at this stage, 6 games in, I think he will find it, but I mean, I've yet to see it.
Would you do like a Mako Little swap?
I think it's way too early to be doing anything too drastic like that. I think it's just, I think you have to let the first maybe 6 weeks of the season play out, and if you need to make any kind of surgical changes, that's when you need to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully he's able to figure it out. Obviously like I said, just a difference making type of pitcher when he's on and at his best. So it's really put an importance on the Fluharty innings because he is, very clearly the number one lefty now at this point. And for a guy who we saw break out really nicely in 2025, it's been nice to see him kind of follow that up here in 2026 and have a strong start, just despite the couple of comebackers that he took in his first game. So,
Yeah, that was tough.
breaking news: Connor Griffin extension with the Pirates, 9 years, 140 million.
So they don't get the PPI pick if that's the case.
No, but good for them.
So they just kept it down for nothing.
Well, he got called up today.
I know, but he could have started. He could have broke camp with them. There's no reason he couldn't have.
He tore it up in AAA. They were like, all right, yeah,
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 fair
good
enough.
enough. One thing that we didn't talk about on our last episode that I did want to ask you about that I just kind of blanked on as we were going through was the arrival of ABS and kind of what your first impressions on of it are, having seen it in action for 6 games of regular season play now.
Obviously, I'm a fan, but there's something kind of funny that I've noticed is, you know, from about 1999 to 2025. I mean, I wasn't really watching baseball in 99, but from about 2005 to 2025, I spent about 20 years watching guys, dot the zone or just miss or whatnot. And it was always, oh, Umpy, you got to get that. Oh, Blue, you got to this. Oh, Blue, you got to get that. And
And and
now
and
I've
now
noticed
it's
myself
oh, you got to
going,
challenge that.
you got to challenge that. You got to check. Come on. You got to know the zone. Uh, I love it. It's great. I think I think there were some concerns during spring that it took a little bit too long. I think that the umps have done a good job condensing it. Before they would come out and they go, the batter is challenging the ball call as a strike or something. And now they just hop out there and they go, the batter's challenging. And, they get it out there quick and it's bang, bang, and it's easy and clean and done with, right? It to me has not slowed the game down. And the two challenges too, I think it's been really interesting to see how those kind of factor in. And then by the end of the game, a lot of the time, you're still getting the umpires, making the big calls because they've used their challenges or whatnot, right? Like this human element that people were so scared of, to me, hasn't gone anywhere.
It's been I think a win for ABS to start the year. If you want to assign winners and losers, a loser is CB Buckner, who obviously has had a rough opening weekend. I think there's like some larger conversations about like you know what this
What
means
is
for
a
the
strike?
future. Well, what this means for the future of umpiring and such stuff like that. That we definitely don't have to dive into here, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds during the year. The Blue Jays have been fairly good at it. Obviously, I think the crowd reactions to it have been really good and a nice unexpected bonus from it to see when they get excited over excited when a call gets overturned or disappointed when a call stays the same. How about though the two calls in this series that were less than a tenth of an inch off the plate, and having two of those is just incredible. I thought.
Razor thin margins. I mean, props to the umps for being able to get those or whatever the case may. I believe it was at least one of them I know definitely was the ump called it a ball, and I think it was Tyler Heineman challenged it, and then it was like less than a tenth of an inch. Uh, I mean, I think umpires, this was kind of a bit of percolated a little bit on social media in certain places. I think of uh, a Close Call Sports, I think, talked about it, and Umpire Scorecard may have talked about it, where umps are a lot better than I think people think they are. The zone has changed. I mean, the zone was once upon a time a bit more of kind of a hamburger, and it's kind of condensed a little bit and
Yeah.
raised a little bit as time has progressed here. But I mean, it's just on the corners is really kind of where the biggest change seems to be. And it seems like, with the introduction of ABS, it's just kept guys more honest. And unless you have a bit of a CB Buckner moment, to me, it's a win for the umps and it's a win for the game as a whole. It takes a lot of heat off of the umps as well. Obviously, there's a bit of embarrassment, But at the same time, you know, they also pick up some wins themselves when they get a call right. And you go, okay, well, never mind. He actually nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I actually, one thing, I think we've talked about this on the show before, but where, I've been anti having the box on the TV screen, and they kind of left it up to the individual broadcasts this year on whether they wanted to keep that in there. The Sportsnet one has been way better this year
Yeah.
than it was last year. So I don't know if that comes along with the ABS system or whatever that
Well,
is, but that's one thing that
they've
I've
had to
noticed.
change
Yeah.
the circles instead of having the filled in and
Yeah.
the whatever circle. It'll be where the spot is, and then it'll flash the velo now,
Yeah.
which I think is a welcome change.
Yeah, it's been better. I've found.
This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
One thing I also, I mean, we talked about Kevin Gausman at length on our last episode, but I did kind of want to finish with him for this series. Another 10 strikeout performance for him. Just an incredible start to the year. And he was kind of one of the guys coming into the year that I was kind of looking at and thinking, how is he going to bounce back after the incredible workload that he held last year? And he's come out, he was throwing 97 into the final inning of his outing in the finale. So, just great stuff from him. It's funny because when we had Mitch Bannon on, obviously we were asking him about the Kevin Gausman article that he wrote, where they were kind of talking about, is the end of Gausman's career on the horizon? And this is a guy who looks like he's at the top of his game right now.
Yeah, this is a guy that was a regression candidate, I think, to say the least, and has looked nothing like that. Is almost certainly in a Cy Young conversation in terms of April 2nd, but still has come out of the gates roaring. And it's been really remarkable. It's been really awesome because, obviously the expectation, I think, was that Cease was the ace. Well, don't look now, but this pair of aces is going to be a huge factor, especially with all the injuries to the rest of the
Yeah.
pitching rotation. And if the offense isn't going to quite be as potent as it was last season.
Yeah, and I mean, for him to continue to make history, obviously he sets the Jays record for most strikeouts in in an opening day start, and then he builds on it and he becomes the first pitcher since 1900 to have 10 or more strikeouts and no walks through their first two starts of the year. Um, like we were talking about it yesterday, but like I mean, you want to go back and like free agent pitching signings in Blue Jays history. It's like Roger Clemens is probably number one because he won two Cy Youngs and was like one of the most incredible pitchers in those two seasons that he spent in Toronto. But like I mean, outside of that, as far as like longevity and just kind of what he has brought to the Blue Jays, like Kevin Gausman is a slam dunk number two, and I think that you could probably make an argument for number one given the impact that he's made.
Yeah, the surplus value, as they so like to call it, right? I mean,
Yeah,
this is a guy that signed for five. I think it might have been 5/100. I don't know if it was
I think he was
exactly
five
that,
one
but
ten.
5/110. And, over the course of these 5 years, he's accrued, I think the number we said was somewhere in the 11 or 12 F war range.
F4 is 18.6.
18.6. So
Yeah.
I'm way low. I mean, like, that's a, over a 5 year period, or really a 4 year period, if we're being honest, that's a $200 million pitcher.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been so good. So hopefully he's able to build off that his next start coming against the Dodgers. So it'll be a little bit tougher of a test, I would imagine, than the Rockies and the A's. But yeah, just wanted to get in there. How incredible that he's been. Last thing we have on our rundown here is the Blue Jays have, or I guess each of the Blue Jays affiliates has announced their rosters to begin the year. Opening day, I guess, is today, where we'll see JoJo Parker make his first pro appearance for the DJs against the Bradenton Pirates and Seth Hernandez. So that'll be fun to have, some baseball still on the TV. But I think most notably among these roster reveals is that Arjun Amala is starting the year back in Vancouver. We'd kind of thought that he would, get the bump despite his struggles halfway through last year. What did you kind of make of him heading back to the Canadians?
He's gonna have to rake, man, because if he comes out of the gate slow, the questions are going to get very loud. I think we kind of talked about this in our prospect review with Doug Fox. The tools obviously all there. This has never been really a question, but uh, the prospect sheen to have to repeat the level is a little bit spooky. So you hope he comes out of the gates flying and hopefully even as the weather warms up, he's up to Dunedin, or excuse me, he's up to New Hampshire. And any concerns you possibly had are pretty well washed away. But it's tough, especially in the cold weather, to get out to a good start in Vancouver. It's going to be a big ask for him, but if he can keep the strikeouts down, if he can keep the walks up, and if he can just muster up a little bit more power in a place that saps it, then I think you'll be okay.
Yeah. And then obviously, we kind of expected JoJo to go to Dunedin and start his year higher than most first round picks, right? Like a lot of the high school draftees from his class are going to start the year in the complex league. So a challenge for him out of the gate, but obviously he's kind of proven that he is going to be, challenged and certainly seems to be capable. Obviously, you want to talk about like helium prospects across baseball, and he is kind of at the top of the list right there. So for him too, I mean, just, him and Blaine Bullard, right? We had Blaine on after the draft last year, like two high school guys getting this assignment right out of the gate, I think really speaks to how the organization feels about them, and is confident in their skills translating. For kind of those two, I mean, what do you kind of expect for them to start the year here?
I don't even think I have expectations. They're both so young at the level. I think
I want
any
you to make a prediction. I want you to put stamp. What is your expectation?
I'm
I
hoping they come out hot. If they listen, JoJo Parker is a guy that people have said if he comes out of the gates hot, look out. This is a guy that could be a Connor Griffin comp. I mean, helium on helium for him. And if he comes out swinging, this could be one of the best prospects in all of baseball.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a second to pull up these rosters real quick. I don't know if you have a way to grab them all real quick because I want to put you through this exercise. We did this written form last year, where we kind of wrote, one pros or two prospects that were eager to watch at each level. But, for the three rosters that we learned of on the other day. I want us to each go back and forth and give one prospect on that roster that we are intrigued by or piques our interest at that individual level, for each of those teams, and a guy that we're interested in watching. I mean, I can start as you pull it up. Do you want to start double A and go down to low A, or start low A and go up to double A?
Let's go start double A.
Double A. All right. So New Hampshire. I mean, I think Gage Stanifer is the easy answer here, where I'm sure he will be getting the start on opening day. But just to make things a little bit more interesting, we were just talking about the left-handed relief options, and again, this isn't. I think he's not a sleeper anymore, but I think Javen Coleman will be really interesting to see how he comes out of the gates at this new level in Double A. He ended his year in Vancouver last year, so I think he'll be interesting to see how he fares if he's a guy that's able to get up to triple A. You listen to like some of the people who make bold predictions on prospects to begin the year, and especially around the Blue Jays. Some was that Coleman would be a guy who impacts the Blue Jays major league roster this year. So that's a guy that I'll be monitoring there in New Hampshire to start 2026 for sure.
Yeah, in New Hampshire, I mean, my eyes immediately go right to Sean Keys. What we saw in spring, we saw he's got some pop. This is a guy that can swing it. I mean, listen, the Jays obviously are a little bit loaded in terms of first base. They're not going to have too many options there. So it's not really clear exactly where Sean Keys would fit into that picture. I mean, he's presumably a first baseman at the big league level. But I mean, the fact that he obviously hits left-handed to me is super interesting. Just on the whole, this is a guy that it seems like could move up the ladder because he's not necessarily going to be encumbered by needing his glove to get there. It's going to be a case where if the bat plays, the bat plays. And if he can get to the point where he can really kind of swing it, because this is a big kid, 6'1", 232 is what he's listed out here on their website. if he can really swing it, I think that there's something to be said there. He's a guy that a lot of people have talked about him being a breakout candidate of the sorts. Um, Immediately keep my eyes on him. I think he'll be really interesting. Obviously, set the home run record in Vancouver last year, like some big pop and a chance to be a real difference maker potentially down the line for the Blue Jays, either as a DH or maybe a bench lefty or anything, but a big leaguer nonetheless.
Yeah, so I don't need to make the case to you as to why he's a breakout candidate, but I just want to rhyme off some of the numbers from him last year in Vancouver, where, as you mentioned, he sets the home run record with 19 there in a park that's very difficult to hit home runs. They obviously say it's the most pitcher friendly park in the minor leagues, and for him, he's a guy who walked 16.3% of the time. He ran a 250 BABIP, and for a guy who hits the ball as hard as he does, who has the swing decisions he's done, obviously you would expect some positive regression there. And also he's a guy who just doesn't swing and miss. He only struck out 22% of the time last year and had a swinging strike rate of 8%. So really, really encouraging stuff there for Sean Keys as we head into 2026 and the short porch down there in Manchester. I think we'll be calling his name often. So definitely a good name to watch there. Let's move on to Vancouver. I mean, obviously we talked about Arjun. I can start off here again. I think you talk about guys who, kind of have some of that helium, and Jake Casey has certainly been one of those guys. I think he's a really interesting name who, has just kind of only hit. And we saw him hit with the Blue Jays in spring training. We saw him hit in Dunedin last year. And, I interested to see how he kind of handles the increased pitching talent and if he's a guy that we could maybe see, hit his way to New Hampshire and, kind of build on the strong start that he's had to his pro career.
Yeah, like obviously a little old for the level last year, but raked in A ball and should, you would think, seamlessly adjust to Vancouver. I'm eyeing up Johnny King, and
Yeah.
what a hot take that is, I'm sure, as the fourth ranked Blue Jays prospect, I believe it is. But, he looked really good last year, like dominated A ball. But high A is going to be a little harder. There's still a lot of questions about his command. It isn't clear if this guy is going to be able to get by with just his pure stuff anywhere above A ball, but is so young that, if he can, it really says something. But if he comes out of the gates hot in Vancouver, you're looking at a pretty dynamite top 100 prospect. He's a lefty with velo, with really
Yeah.
good stuff. And, the fact that they're pushing him here, right? This will be his third level in just about, 6 months of ball because he only played about half of last season in Dunedin, spent a lot of the year in rookie ball.
Yeah.
So, for me, the statement here is that they've given him a chance to let it ride in Vancouver. Obviously, again, as a ballpark that's going to suppress offense, you would figure he'll benefit. But if the strikeout numbers can remain high, this is a guy that could potentially be, knocking on the door, something like that, if they're looking for a lefty in like September.
What do you make of them last year starting Trey Savage, Cal Steven, some of those guys in Dunedin due to the weather, and this year just feeling, safe enough to send Johnny King there instead of, giving him that like kind of certain start?
I hadn't really thought of that, but I do think that's really interesting
I
because
I
obviously well, yeah, we'd heard that the weather was a huge factor, and then,
yeah.
this goes against that.
I think it kind of speaks to maybe the expectations, right? Where, Savage, you felt like he could push his way through the minors, right? Like I think that they weren't going to be as patient with him, right? Like they pushed him through quick and obviously benefited from it in the postseason. To me, it just kind of says, like say Johnny King has a start thrown off by a rain or a rain delay or some bad weather, that maybe it's not the end of the world, right? Because they're going to be more patient with him and maybe don't see him as being like a major league guy this year. But yeah, no, will be fun to see him there for sure. I think too, you look at the rest of that staff and it's just a ton of really interesting names. Austin Cates and Daniel Guerra both had really, really strong finishes to the year last year. Landon Marutis is a really, he was a buzzy name in 2024 and then had to undergo, the internal brace surgery and really struggled when he got back. So that's a guy who you certainly, could see him kind of having a bounce back year. Carson Pierce, friend of the show, we had him on around this time last year, and he's coming back from Tommy John. So some really good pitching depth there in Vancouver, which will be fun to watch for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be a good group there. I mean, the Canadians have been blessed with some really interesting, really exciting pitchers over the last little while. So, I mean, Johnny King and Lennon Murtis, like these just add to that list of names.
Yeah. Let's move on to Dunedin. I mean, obviously JoJo Parker and Blaine Bullard. We talked about them. I'm not gonna, if you want to pick one of them, you can, but I'm going to go in a different direction. Just given the fact that we had already talked about those guys. One guy that I'm like fairly intrigued by is Yorman Lecourt, who last year in the DSL was, or sorry, not in the DSL, in the FCL was really good. He hit 6 homers in that and was in that league and was one of the key offensive contributors for the FCL team in their in their complex league championship, and he had a 123 WRC plus. Came up to Dunedin once their season ended and struggled with a little bit of swing and miss. So will be interesting to see how he kind of fares over a larger sample in low A, and he's a switch hitter with some impressive pop. So kind of intrigued to see how he fares in Dunedin with that more kind of with that year of experience already under his belt.
I'm eyeing up Brandon Barriera. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it would be great if he was finally healthy, if you could finally have him pitch a proper season. This guy has 27 total innings in the minor leagues, was drafted with the 23rd pick in the 2022 draft. And we've heard over and over and over again that this guy's a dog and that this guy can and should have the stuff to be a big league contributor, but it's just been completely obliterated by injuries and one after another. And if he's finally healthy, if he can finally show something, what if? I mean, that's the big question, right? I mean,
Yeah.
is he going to be a top of the rotation guy? I mean, that much is probably not going to happen, but to me, I think you could find a big leaguer in this guy if he can stay healthy. And will he stay healthy? I don't know. I certainly don't have any evidence to believe he will. But if he does stay healthy, it's just an enormous turning point for this guy.
He's still 22, right? Like I guess if you looked at it, he would be.
Just turned 22, I
Yeah,
should
like
add.
he
Just turned
he was
22.
younger than Trey Savage was last year. So lots of development time for him to kind of figure it out and work his way through. One last guy I did want to shout out on their roster is Troy Guthrie, who will be the opening day starter for them tonight. He was like just really excellent in the FCL last year, and you want to talk about like 2024 draft wins for this Blue Jays team. You have Trey Savage, you have Johnny King, you have Cal Steven, who was obviously traded for Shane Bieber, and Troy Guthrie, a high school righty who was taken in the 11th round. Like that's a guy who I would certainly kind of be eyeing up as, an under the radar guy that could maybe jump up. Last year he had 21% K rate, 4% walk rate, like didn't give up homers, struck out a fair amount of guys. Like that's a guy who I think it'll be nice to have a televised look at rather than just, kind of going through the box scores.
Yeah. I mean, exciting to have some minor league baseball on to just, prospects are back and
Yeah.
you and I both love a good little prospect box score hunting.
I'm glad that you were able to jump on that because I did not prepare you for going through those rosters at all. So I appreciate that you were able to catch up there and rhyme off some really interesting names. But it should be a fun year in the Blue Jays minor leagues with a ton of interesting different stories to follow. Before we run for the day, you have any last thoughts, prospects, Rocky series, looking ahead to this White Sox series, anything at all that's catching your interest here as we head into the weekend?
I think it is going to be a real interesting weekend. Just proving this Rocky series is a blip and not a trend.
Yeah. It'll be a good one. As we mentioned, they're back tomorrow. Dylan Cease against the White Sox back in his old home will be fun. And I would certainly expect him to once again be at the top of his game. So will be fun to watch. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening along the audio provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow all of us on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEV_pod. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the games this weekend.